RC from the Mountaintop Joiner Shop here. I was just applying the finishing touches to this walnut sideboard, and I'm about to deliver it to the client, but in the meantime, while I was applying finish to this piece, it occurred to me that wood finishing is a subject that I've never really tackled on my YouTube channel. And there are plenty of reasons for that. It's just a big, complicated subject. But nevertheless, in this video, I'm going to give it the old college try. I'm going to talk about the finishing products that I use and why I like them. But more generally, the goal of this video is to just give you information that helps you wrap your head around this whole wood finishing business and help you make more informed choices about the products that you use in your shop and help you kind of narrow it down, because there are a bewildering array of choices out there. So let's give it a shot. Okay, so before I get too far into this subject, I feel I should issue a bit of a disclaimer. I like to anticipate the kind of pushback I'm going to get when I film a video. And in this video, I'm going to be making some sweeping generalizations about finish that you very well may be able to cite some specific anecdotal examples that seem to stand in contradiction to it. So in the course of this video, I might say something like about Danish oil. And you might be inclined to answer with a, "Not true, RC, that's not true. You see, my grandpappy used to mix up his own Danish oil. He would mix it with turpentine and some varnish and the juice from inside those jellyfish that used to wash up on the beach. Man, that finish was so easy to apply. Man, he just walked past his piece dragging a brush and it was on. It was so easy and it was durable too. One time my cousin Cletus, he dripped some Frank's Red Hot right on the surface of one of the pieces that he finished with that special concoction, and it didn't do anything to it. Normally it'd just burn a hole right through it, but not in this case. I swear, this stuff could deflect bullets if it had to. Don't ask me how I know that. So yes, while you may be able to cite specific counterexamples to the things I say in this video, generally speaking, what I say is true, I hope. I'm going to do my best here. But I may say generally speaking about 10 times in this video just to drive that point home. So, generally speaking, what are we dealing with when we're dealing with wood finishes, when we're trying to pick one out? As I see it, the array of wood finishing products on the market seem to fall on a spectrum, and all of those products have certain attributes that can at times be at odds with each other. So those attributes might include ease of application, safety while applying them, the cost of the finish, and of course the durability of the finish in the long term. You'll find that as one of those attributes increases along the spectrum, the other might fall off, and that's why choosing a finish can be so difficult. Okay, so to better illustrate the point I was just making, I think a visual aid might be in order here. And so I drew up this little chart. And to emphasize how super scientific and dead nuts accurate this is, I did it using my kids' crayons. So on the vertical axis here, I have a lot and not so much. And then on the bottom axis here, the horizontal axis, I have from left to right, I have oil and wax finishes, water-based finishes, things like Danish oil, which are a oil and varnish mix, shellac, lacquer, and then things like conversion varnish, which are super chemically, right? I guess all of them are super chemically. But anyways, and then I have different colors to denote the different attributes I was just talking about. So one of those is safety. That would be VOCs. Talk more about those in just a moment. The durability of the finish, the ease with which it is applied, and the cost of the finish. And you'll see how all those attributes kind of play against each other when you're trying to pick a finish. So the first thing we'll talk about is the safety of a given finish. And when I talk about safety, what I'm really talking about is the VOC content. So what the heck are VOCs anyways? So VOC stands for volatile organic compounds. It's any compound of carbon that easily becomes a gas and enters the atmosphere, and your lungs for that matter. So sources of VOCs are often added to paints and things like wood finishes to allow other additives to better mix with each other or to control the drying time of the finish. And some of the health effects of VOCs can include, but might not necessarily be limited to, things like eye and nose and throat irritation. You can get headaches, it can make you dizzy, it can make you feel nauseous. If you're really lucky, it can damage your liver and kidneys or your central nervous system. Some VOCs, not all, but some VOCs are even carcinogenic. They can give you cancer. So generally speaking, VOCs are bad. VOCs are typically measured in grams per liter, and they are often lower in things like water-based finishes. To give you an idea, water-based finishes usually have about 275 grams per liter or lower. And for comparison's sake, something like a conversion varnish is on the upper end. It has about 725 grams per liter on average. Your lacquer is going to be something like 680, something like that. One of my favorite products I'll talk about later is a Dewaxed Shellac, the Zinsser seal coat that I use. It has 653 grams per liter. Something like a Watco Danish oil in the natural color has 275 grams per liter. The VOCs in a finish can actually vary with the color of the finish that you're using, but I only use clear finishes typically. Some oil and wax products like Rubio Monocoat, for instance, have 0 VOCs, and others like the Osmo Polix have closer to like 500 grams per liter. So that kind of gives you a sense of the level of VOCs in your finishes. So I'm going to draw a little line here, green for VOCs, and I'm just going to go up like that. And it might not necessarily be all that linear, but it gives you the idea. So with my green line here, you can see that things like oils and oil and wax and water-based finishes are on the not so much end of the spectrum when it comes to VOCs. And as you go to something like a conversion varnish, you end up with a lot of VOCs, which is why when you're applying any of these products over here on this end of the spectrum, it's very important that you wear a respirator to protect your lungs from all the stuff floating around in the air when these finishes are drying and off-gassing and all that. So the next thing we'll talk about is durability. Now, again, generally speaking, things like oil and wax finishes are not very durable at all. They don't do much to resist scratches. If you spill liquids on them and don't wipe them up immediately, they can eventually soak into the wood, even potentially stain it. So they tend not to be quite as durable. Now water-based, that can really depend on the product. Water-based products have gotten much better over the years, both in terms of things like ease of application and in durability. But for our purposes, I just kind of put it in this spot on the chart. Those can be pretty durable. In fact, probably more durable than Danish oil. As we go along here, we end up with finishes like lacquer and conversion varnish. Those are more of a film finish as opposed to an oil finish. They leave a thin film on the surface of the wood that help protect it to a degree. So they can resist things like dings and scratches a little bit better. They prevent the ingress of things like liquids much better. That said, and I actually should probably add a color here, these are difficult to repair if they do get screwed up. Whereas if you have an oil and wax finish, well, they can get dinged more easily. They're very easy to repair. You just reapply some oil and wax over the top of it, which you already have there, and it'll look as good as new. So I'm going to go find another crayon, another color, and draw that line in too. So I've added another color here in orange, and it's repair. So in terms of durability, I would grade that more on a curve. So I'm going to draw a line that curves upward for things like lacquer and conversion varnish. And then when we talk about repairability, things like oil and wax are a lot repairable. And I'm going to draw a curve down like that. If you ding up a conversion varnish, which I admit is difficult to do, it's pretty hard to fix. So now we got 3 of our lines. Now we'll talk about ease of applicability. When you're applying a finish, obviously there's something to be said for how easy it is to do that. It can be a royal pain in the tuchus sometimes, depending upon what you're using. So generally speaking, things like oil and wax finishes, well, they require a little more elbow grease to apply. You're like rubbing this finish all over the nooks and crannies of your piece that you're trying to finish. They do go on in a way that is hard to screw up. So there's something to be said for that. These are generally pretty easy to apply. Also, when you talk about stuff like lacquer or conversion varnish, you're generally spraying that on. And spraying finishes is actually very easy. It just requires fancy equipment. And then things like a shellac, to my mind, are a little bit more fraught with peril than either end of this spectrum here. At least in my shop, I have a very dry shop, and when I apply shellac, it does have a tendency to kind of dry before I finished applying it. So if I'm applying with a brush It starts drying so fast that the finish starts pulling. You'll even yank little bristles out of a brush if you're going too slow. When I apply it with a spray gun, I got to be careful I don't get dry spray. This stuff almost flash dries on me. So shellac is actually a little bit tricky to apply. When I think about ease of application, what I think should be the case is a line that kind of goes like this. Like that. So conversion varnishes, stuff that you spray, pretty easy to apply. Oil and oil wax are maybe a little more labor intensive, but hard to screw up. And then stuff like shellac is kind of in the middle there. And then last of all, we have cost. And again, generally speaking, things on the left end of the spectrum here tend to be a little bit less costly, whereas fancy spray finishes tend to be a little bit more costly. But that can vary from product to product quite a bit. So what I'm going to do in this case is draw a line that goes up, but I'm going to make it wavy. Like that, all right? So there's my super scientific, super accurate chart explaining what it is like to try to choose a finish. As you can see, no one finish is going to have the best of all worlds. And so you kind of have to decide which of these attributes is the most important to you. And you might only be able to find that out by experimenting with them and seeing how you like them that way. So hopefully this gives you an idea of what you're dealing with when it comes to wood finishes. So at this point in the video, I might be curious as to what my personal finishing regimen is and how I ended up using it. So one of the products over the course of my early career that I experimented with and really liked is by Vermont Natural Coatings. It's called Polyway. It's their Polyway furniture finish. And I don't have the actual can or bottle for this particular finish sitting here because I hate them. They have a tendency to gum up at the mouth of the can and prevent you from closing it, and then you end up with dried finish stuck to the top of it, and you can't get the thing open. So the first thing I do when I buy a can of the Vermont Natural Coatings Polyway is transfer it to a different bottle, one that I can easily pour the finish out of and wipe the mouth of it clean and close it up. So this is what I keep my Polyway in. This is what I typically apply as my last coat of finish for a few reasons. One of which is ease of application. It's something that can be wiped on, although if you're in a dry shop like I work in, you might have some issues with it leveling all that well, and you might have to sand it flat again before reapplying. You can actually bring it to a fine glossy polish if you're so inclined. I do make this product in two different sheens. This one you see I have marked here PWG, that's Polyway Gloss, so the gloss finish is what I typically purchase. They also have a Polyway Satin, I think it's called. In my experience, whether the finish ends up being gloss or satin has more to do with the way I apply it than which of the two finishes I've purchased. So with the gloss, if I'm spraying it on, it tends to go on with more of a satin look. If I'm wiping it on, then it tends to go on with more of a gloss to it. So I just buy the Polyway Gloss and apply it how I'm going to apply it. This stuff is also very low in VOCs because it is a water-based finish. And I've used other water-based finishes in the past, like acrylic and stuff like that, that I just absolutely did not like. They don't level well at all. They just dry unevenly. They're just gross. I've tried polyacrylics in days gone by that I did not like at all. But with this Vermont Natural Coatings Polyway stuff, the binder they use in this finish is actually whey, which is a byproduct from the dairy industry. That's what's kind of the binder in this product. And I don't know if that's what gives it its seeming magical properties, but it does seem to level better than other water-based finishes I've used. I can wipe it on, I can spray it on. Because it's water-based, it tends not to make as much of a mess. You can just wipe it up with soapy water. So this is what I like to use as my final coat on a given finish. That said, because it is water-based, it tends not to give any color to the wood, and I really do like to get that most of the time. The only time I use this by itself without anything going on before it is when I want that finish to be as light a color as possible. So say I'm doing a finish like a white oak finish or maybe a maple finish, and I want that to be as light a color as possible. I don't want a yellow oak, right? In a case like that, I will apply this from start to finish. And because it's water-based, it does have a tendency to raise the grain a little bit. So I'll have to sand in between coats, or at least after the initial coats. But if I use this product by itself, it imparts very little color to the wood whatsoever. So it's very versatile that way, and I really like it. When I'm applying it, I might not even put on a respirator, which, you know, it's up to you how far you want to go with the safety protocol, but it is pretty low in VOCs compared to most finishes. It actually smells pretty good, which, given that it does have some VOCs, probably shouldn't be smelling it. But that's the Vermont Natural Coatings Polyway Gloss. Really love this stuff. So what do I do if I want to get a finish that actually does have a little bit of color to it, a little bit of ambering, a little bit of warmth? So the way I would do that, and also avoid raising the grain with my first application of this finish, is to use a Dewaxed Shellac. And rather than mix up my own, I like to just keep it simple, go to the hardware store and get this Zinsser Bullseye Seal Coat. This is a Dewaxed Shellac, and that's very important because some shellacs have a wax in them. And as such, they are the kind of thing that if you try to apply a different finish over the top of it, it doesn't want to stick. But if the shellac is dewaxed, then it will stick to practically anything, and almost anything will stick to it. So a dewaxed shellac, to my mind, is a great way to impart a little bit of color to the wood, and is relatively easy to apply. There are some issues when you're in a dry shop like mine, but I have applied it in a number of ways. If I'm just doing a small part, I might actually make a pad, what some finishers call a rubber. So that's basically just taking a wad of cheesecloth and wrapping it up in a lint-free cloth and just soaking the finish into that and then just wiping it on. Let it dry, wipe it on, let it dry, wipe it on. You can also do what they call a French polish, which is a subject I'm not even going to touch in this video. And you can also just put it in a spray gun and spray it. The solvent that you'd use to clean this up is denatured alcohol. And as such, it's lower in VOCs than a lot of other film finishes are, but not that much so, as I'm learning. As I was researching this video, I realized that this actually does have a decent amount of VOCs in it. So when you're applying this, you really should wear a respirator and not let that nastiness get in your lungs. Now, there is another case where I'll actually use a third product in my finishing regimen, and that special case is walnut. Before I finish the walnut and it's just been sanded or whatnot, the wood very well may have an almost like a chocolate milk that has too much marshmallow in it. It's kind of a light brown color, almost tan. And ultimately, I don't really like that look. I want my walnut to be chocolatey brown, dark chocolatey brown as much as possible. So when I'm selecting boards, I tend to select the darker ones that have more heartwood and less sapwood. But also, my initial finish that I apply to walnut is going to be something like a Danish oil. This is an oil and varnish mix, and it can then just be wiped on and the excess wiped off. And this soaks into the wood and darkens it considerably. This is just the natural. I don't like Danish oils that have stain in them. They tend to use a pigment stain. That stuff tends to muddy up the grain of the wood. In fact, I do very little when it comes to things like stains and dyes. That is a science unto itself. You really got to know what you're doing. You have to do a lot of experimentation and test pieces, and it's just fraught with peril. And I like to keep it simple and showcase the wood a little bit more in its natural state instead of dyeing it or using some kind of stain. So in any of these cases, I'm always going to be using the natural version of it. Yeah, putting Danish oil on a walnut will just darken the heck out of it, make it nice and chocolatey. And of course, you need to give it some time to cure before you apply anything over the top of it, usually 3 or 4 days at the least. At that point, I'll come back and spray it with some Dewaxed Shellac. That kind of acts as a binder coat between the Danish oil and the Polyway. As I told you earlier, a Dewaxed Shellac will stick to damn near anything, and almost anything will stick to it. That said, there have been cases where I've experimented with this Polyway and wiped it on things that I wouldn't expect it to stick to so well, given that it's a film finish. I'm really impressed with the way this stuff sticks to things. I don't know if it'll stick to anything or everything, but it does better than you might expect from something that's a film finish. So now that I've talked about the finishing products that I like and why I like them, I'll just touch upon the methods for application that I tend to use. So in days gone by, you know, I would just wipe everything. I'd either pat it on using a rubber, like I talked about earlier. I'll use a brush. It's very important that you use good brushes. The brushes I use are from Gramercy Tools. They make one specifically for water-based and for shellac. So maybe check them out if you're in the market for brushes. That said, depending upon the humidity in your shop, how hot or cold it is, what kind of technique you're using, your results may vary, and you may or may not be satisfied with what you're getting out of applying the finishes that way. This has certainly been the case with me. Back when applying finish by hand was really my only option, I was a little bit frustrated with the variability in the results that I was getting. And so if you're in that boat, you very well may be inclined to use things that are more of an oil and wax finish, like a Rubio Monocoat or an Osmo or something like that, just because those finishes are harder to screw up. Whereas, you know, using a brush or something like that is a little bit more technique intensive. That being the case, because I am a furniture maker that is now doing it for money and finish pieces with some regularity, I did go ahead and invest in a spray turbine. And wow, what a game changer that is. If you are finishing furniture with any regularity at all, you got to get yourself one of these. This one is the Apollo Eco 4. This is a 4-stage turbine. When you're looking at turbines, the ones that have the most stages tend to be the less finicky with what kind of finish you put through them. So they give you a little bit more wiggle room as far as what you actually put through your spray gun. But all spray turbines tend to be pretty noisy. They're right up there with leaf blowers as far as annoying your neighbors. So bear that in mind. They're also quite pricey, but they are absolute game changer when it turns to ease of application. Spraying a finish is, once you've got the technique down, very easy and yields you pro results that are hard to argue with. So I'm not going to be talking about spray finishing technique in this video. I am by no means a professional furniture finisher. I'm a professional furniture maker who also does furniture finishing, if that makes any sense. So if you want to learn more about how to use spray turbines, there are a ton of good YouTube videos already out there. And in fact, some of the ones you might want to look into are the ones where you have professional automotive finishers talking about how to use spray turbines. Those guys tend to know a lot about this kind of technique. So if you're in the market for a turbine, Apollo is one popular brand name, Fuji is another. Personally, I've had some customer service experiences with Apollo that were among the worst I've ever had. So if I were doing it again, I'd probably buy a Fuji spray system or something else. But any spray turbine is just going to make a world of difference for what you're getting out of your finishes. I do have one type of spray gun. This is the one with the cup is on the bottom. There are also the gravity feed ones where you have the cup on top. Given that I only have one gun and I'm switching back and forth between spraying shellac, which is alcohol based, or your denatured alcohol is your solvent for that, what you would clean the gun with afterwards, and spraying a water-based finish, which you would clean using soapy water, dish soap basically. I tend to get a spray gun that is downright filthy because no one solvent is going to remove both of these finishes. So my spray gun tends to get pretty gross. I'm not great at cleaning it. And that's why I don't feel comfortable being the guy to tell you how to use one of these. Ultimately, if money were no object, I think I would get specific spray guns for specific finishes. So I get a spray gun that is dedicated to spraying my Dewaxed Shellac and only ever put that through the gun and clean it with denatured alcohol, and then have a separate spray gun that is only ever for spraying my Polyway, which I would then clean out with soapy water. And I think I would have a little bit better luck keeping my spray gun cleaned out if I were to go that route. So if you're unfamiliar with spray finishing, you might think that once you've sprayed the finish on, you're done. And you really aren't, at least not in my case, because when I'm spraying out of doors. I don't have the space to spray this stuff indoors, nor the means of controlling the atmosphere in a way that I'm just not, I'm getting finish on stuff, sucking VOCs in my lungs and all that. So I do all my finishing outside, and that's an environment in which little dust nibs can land on your finish before it's dried. You can also get what's called dry spray. I'm in the high desert, essentially, and dry spray is a thing. So what that means is basically the finish has started to dry before it's even landed on your workpiece. It hasn't made it from the gun to the workpiece yet. And the finish that leaves behind can be very sandpapery. And so the way I would address that is to rub the surface with things like paperboard and paper bags. So just go to the recycling bin and dig out what I can find. And I did a whole video about that way back when I was just starting my channel. So if you want to see me go more in depth into that technique, look for that video. I'll just leave a link in the description if I can find it. That's the way I'll address things like dry spray and dust nips and smooth it out. But I'm still not quite done. What I like to do, and I'm going to be skewered for this, I'm sure of it, is this product right here. This is Pedro's Bike Lust. I worked in the cycling industry for a good, 15 years. And I used to use this stuff all the time on bicycles because it sheds dirt so well and helps resist scratching. It also has a UV protectant in it. And so when you apply this to something like a furniture piece, it can help prevent UV degradation of the wood, which in a case like the walnut I was talking about earlier, walnut's very dark to start with, but with years of UV exposure, it'll actually lighten quite a bit. If you look at walnut pieces in museums that are hundreds of years old, they're almost blonde. They almost look like ash. So in order to slow that inevitable change in color, I use this as a UV protectant. And of course, I think the Polyway Gloss has a little bit of a UV protectant in it as well. Between the two of them, I'm getting quite a bit of help there. But also, this is basically a silicone polish. And as such, after you've applied it, it is super silky smooth. It's the kind of thing that every time your client walks by it, you're just gonna has to give it a feel. You have to feel it up. They can't resist fondling the furniture that you made for them. So I really like it for that reason. But there will be people, mainly furniture refinishers, that will hate you for this. They will curse your name up and down because you put silicone on a workpiece. And that's something that they may not know is there when they first go to refinish a piece. And once they find out it is there, they have to use some funky chemicals probably to get it off. They very well may not be happy with you for having used this, but when it comes to the results that I get when I'm delivering a piece of furniture, this stuff is awesome. And you can find it at any bike shop. It's pretty cheap. You just spray it on the workpiece, wipe it down with a lint-free cloth. And next thing you know, your finish is just super buttery, silky smooth. It's awesome. That, in a nutshell, is my entire finishing regimen. Now, finishing regimens are a very personal thing. Almost every furniture maker you talk to is going to have their own regimen. And by and large, they all kind of just fell into it via experimentation, finding out what they like and don't like about a given finish. So that said, if you do want to experiment with any of the finishes that I talked about in this video, most of them can be found at local hardware stores. You know, this is at bike shops. But I'll leave affiliate links in the description in case you want to just have any of these delivered to your door. When you purchase those products via those links, you don't pay any extra, but a small percentage of the purchase price does go towards supporting this channel. So if you want to give a little bit of help this way, that's one way you can do it. The Polyway is something that might not be at local stores so much, but you could easily buy it online, I'm sure. In this video, I hope you got a better sense of what the landscape is like in terms of wood finishing, what the perceived pros and cons to those various finishes are, and I hopefully it guides you along your furniture finishing experimentation journey a little more quickly, so you can get to the finishes that satisfy you a little bit more quickly. That's kind of the idea here. So I appreciate you watching, and we'll catch you in the next video. Now, if you like what you saw here, please hit like and subscribe. It would help me out a lot. Also hit the little bell icon if you want to be notified anytime I release a new video. And if you didn't like what you saw here, keep it to yourself, pal. Or watch one of my other videos. You might like one of those. Thank you for watching.